Between August 2005 and January 2007, Carol and I paid 3 visits to the small town of Caumont near Rouen in France. To be a little more precise, Carol and I were actually staying in a lovely airy house owned by Louise and Les Solomon. The house overlooked the River Seine. Louise was a good friend of Carol's, and she taught at South Wilts Grammar School for Girls at the same time as Carol, but she and Les had by this time, August 2005, moved to the lovely little village of Caumont, where Louise was going to run art classes and Les was going to be the chef de maison. I was in attendance as Carol's +1, and I hoped I could pass my time sitting under a shady tree in Les and Louise's lovely garden, where I hoped I could write a novel which I was planning to call Zombie Confessional. Les, as it turned out, was a fantastic chef de maison who made all of our meals fresh every day. He sourced the ingredients for our meals from local farms and markets. Our little group in Caumont consisted of Judith and Nick Tallis, Barbara and Neil Smith, and Alan Wood and his girlfriend Sophie, who was at that point doing her PhD in biochemistry. Judith, Barbara and Carol were all teachers at South Wilts Grammar School for Girls, and Alan was the son of the school librarian. Louise's well-appointed studio sat next to the house in a separate little building. One of the many delights of being in a house overlooking the Seine was that boats would pass by. On more than one occasion, I woke up in the middle of the night in the pitch dark to see the lights of some huge, mysterious freighter passing by our first floor window. On the first day of Carol's art lessons, I snuck off and went up the hill to visit the village of Caumont. According to my diary, I set off bathed in the aroma of gefilte fish balls which Les was frying in the kitchen. Caumont turned out to be ridiculously picturesque. Even the local farm animals seemed to pose for the camera. I said hello to an elderly, unshaven old French gentleman and was barraged with good-humoured, high-speed banter, none of which meant a thing to me. Despite Caumont being a small village, I managed to get thoroughly lost in the woods nearby. However, by a cunning process of turning right whenever possible, I found myself heading back down towards Chez Solomon, where I arrived at 3 minutes to lunchtime. We ate gorgeous salads and cheeses in the shade of a tree on their expansive lawn. The following morning, we all trooped off to La Bouille, a very pretty neighbouring town. The idea was that the art group would pick a subject and do some preliminary drawings and then return to the studio to finish the work off in glorious Technicolor. Louise shepherded us back to the house in time for lunch, early in the afternoon, which again we had in the shade of a big tree in the garden. Not long after lunch, Carol returned to La Bouille to do some photographing for her project. Later, I took the car ferry from La Bouille across to the other bank of the Seine. I spent about 2 hours wandering around there in a village called Saint-Hur. I met a dog that went for a swim in the river, 2 people on horseback, a group of friendly ponies in a field, and various locals, almost all of whom would respond in kind when I said bonjour. After an early lunch at noon on the Wednesday, we all set off for the Monet Garden in Giverny. In my diary, I wrote, "The garden is a chaotic riot of flowers, seeming at first to be entirely out of control, but actually organised to some extent, presumably to maintain the place in the style Monet favoured. I've never seen so many cameras being used so much anywhere. These must be the world's most photographed flowers." The house itself was, like all such places, less of a house than a museum. I didn't get much sense of what life would have been like with Mr. and Mrs. Monet, but I did get to see lots of copies of Monet paintings. I liked the odd colour schemes though, especially the vibrantly yellowed dining room, which almost required dark glasses to be donned on entry. Louise and Les's garden was an absolute delight. So, whenever the gang was busy in the studio painting and drawing, I would repair to the shade of a lovely little tree next to the wall in the garden. I would settle down, open up my laptop and start typing a few hundred words more for my novel. By Thursday, I had managed to complete a 3rd chapter of the novel, but we also managed a visit into Rouen to see the cathedral and stroll around the market. No holiday abroad is ever complete for Carol and I until we've been to visit the local market. The market in Rouen was a great delight. It offered an impressive display of bric-a-brac, fish, cheap clothes, fabrics, sausages of all sorts, DVDs, CDs, books and assorted cast-offs. We found a wonderful object on one stall. It was a box with various compartments and sliding plates inside, a handle on the top that could turn and a spout on one side. We asked the stallholder what it was and he said, "Aucune idée." In other words, no idea. went back to Les and Louise's house for another splendid dinner prepared by Les, but we drove back into Rouen after the sun had set. We travelled in a convoy of cars led by Les along tiny French backroads. The purpose of the trip was to see the Son et Lumiere show at Rouen Cathedral, in which Monet's paintings of the cathedral were projected onto the stone walls. The effect was amazing, transforming the huge edifice into a fantasy cathedral, sometimes appearing as if underwater, sometimes looking like a Technicolor version of the Gaudi Cathedral in Barcelona, or like an op-art structure in black and white. It was quite breathtaking. We had enjoyed Caumont so much that we returned again, not once but twice. The first of these two additional visits, in November 2006, enabled us to visit more local towns. We particularly enjoyed having lunch at the Restaurant de la Poste in Duclair, where the food was superb. We carried on along the far side of the Seine that same day till we reached the Abbey at Jumièges, looking magnificent in the late afternoon sunlight. On another day we drove to Honfleur, a lovely little fishing port on the Normandy coast, where we had coffee in a harbour front cafe. We met a lovely, elegant, well-spoken old lady who had moved to Honfleur from London 16 years earlier and didn't seem to have regretted a single day of it. She gave us directions to the Maison Satie, an Eric Satie museum, which we thoroughly enjoyed, before strolling on to visit St. Catherine's, a beautiful little wooden church tucked away up a side street. Another mouth-wateringly yummy meal was had at Le Gastronome restaurant in La Brie, very close to where Les and Louise lived. Somewhere on this visit, we also managed to fit in a trip to the beach at Deauville, where we had a lovely meal at the Rive d'Auge. Our final visit to Caumont took place in January 2007. Louise and Les were off on a jaunt around the world, so we were welcomed by their son Jake, who was in residence. He described himself as an artist. We were fortunate enough to be joined on this, our third trip to Caumont, by our dear friend Annabelle Whittet. In the course of our few days with Annabelle, we visited yet more French towns and ate more French food in more French restaurants. Probably the most enjoyable of all was our final meal in Le Manoir des Sources at Molyneux, just a couple of miles along the Seine. It was a splendid old manor inside its own walled grounds, and being the only diners, we had 100% service from the nice old monsieur who attended us. And the final bonus of our trips to Caumont was that I managed to finish off my novel, Zombie Confessional. A decade and a half later, it still remains unpublished.